Without doubt, the greatest gift that God has given to the human race is the gift of family. And I am very much reminded of that today. For when I hear the name Polino, I think of family. For that is indeed an important thought in their way of being. Family is really a great gift from God. Family is what brings us into the world. Family is what sustains us and supports us and encourages us, nurtures us, teaches us, corrects us, improves us. Family is what makes it possible for us to live joyful, happy, and successful lives in this world. But that's not all that families do. Sometimes families can be the source of great sadness, sorrow, and pain. And sometimes family can bring about tremendous conflict amongst the various members of the family. And when those conflicts occur within a family, they can be very devastating. They can destroy relationships forever. And so they're not to be taken lightly. As Jesus was journeying towards Jerusalem, someone in the crowd came to him and asked him a question. Now, this was not an unusual thing for Jesus. Many times when Jesus was journeying through various places, people would come to him and ask him for various questions, or in some cases ask him for certain favors. And that's what happened in this particular gospel story. Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me. Well, that's an unusual request when it comes right down to it, because the family inheritance, one would think, is something that should have been already established. For the law of Moses made it very clear that when a person dies, if he has two sons, the one son gets 2/3 of the estate and the other son gets 1/3. Of course, if you have 3 or 4 sons, it becomes more complicated, doesn't it? But that was the way it was. And so to ask Jesus, like one of the rabbis, to intervene in this situation was really asking Jesus to get involved in something that he really should never have been involved in at all. And that's exactly how Jesus responded. He says, look, this is not my problem. I can't solve this problem for you. You've got to work it out among yourselves. Who sent me to be a judge or arbitrator over you? And so he refused to intervene. But he didn't just ignore the situation. Instead, he reframed the question and redefined what the problem really was. But Jesus said to him, take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. The man's problem, you see, was not that his brother would not share an inheritance with him. The law made it very clear how that money was to be distributed, how that land was to be apportioned, and so on. The real problem was that he was greedy, and he wanted to get more of what he thought he was entitled to. And Jesus gave him that solemn warning. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. For that indeed is a great problem that human beings suffer from. We have a great problem when it comes to greed. We have something and we want more. Our neighbor has something and we want that. And so on and so on. I remember seeing a license plate on the back of a car that said, more stuff. And just think about that. For some people, that's what life is all about. Collecting and accumulating as much stuff as possible. And the proliferation of those storage units all around our community, you've seen them everywhere now, and there are more and more under construction all the time. Why? Because we have so much stuff. We don't know what to do with it all. And even if we build another house or garage, or we add some other kind of storage, it still is not enough. We never know when enough is enough. We always want more. Jesus tells the crowd a story. And the story is easy for you to remember, now that you've heard it. A rich landowner had a farm, and that farm produced abundantly, so much so that he had a terrible problem. What was he going to do with all of that abundance? What was he going to do with all of that crop? His barns were full. He had no more places to put it. What a terrible problem to have. It's kind of like looking at your bank account and saying, my goodness, look at all the money in my bank account. What am I going to do? I can't have that much money in my bank account. I've got an idea. I'll open another bank account. Well, that's kind of what he did. He said, I'm going to build another barn. Or I'm going to build a few more barns. I'll tear down the old one. I don't need that. And I'm going to keep as much of whatever I have for myself. Far beyond what he needed, by the way, but enough to create a real problem for him. Now, what's wrong with that? Who of us would really have a problem if all of a sudden we won the lottery? Or if all of a sudden we gained an unexpected inheritance or some kind of windfall? Who can have a problem with that? Well, what was wrong? Well, in the case of the rich man, there are a few things that were wrong. One is that he saw everything that he had as being his. He saw himself as being the owner of everything that he owned. And so that was the thing that he felt he was responsible for. He had to keep it. He had to keep it for himself. I must keep everything that I have. And I must save for a rainy day. Which in Israel, of course, comes very rarely. But that was his attitude. It's mine. It's mine. What else can I do? I've got to build a bigger barn. That was the only solution that he could come up with, because his world centered around himself. It was all about him. He was the middle of everything, and everything he owned belonged to him. And so what do? You get more stuff, you build a bigger barn. The second problem that he had is that he forgot where all that stuff came from in the first place. Well, chances are he thought of himself as being a great agriculturalist. But if he was a rich farmer, he probably didn't even touch the soil himself. But he probably hired people to plow the ground and then plant the seed and do whatever fertilizing or whatever was necessary, and then count upon nature to provide the rest. Ultimately, of course, the product was produced not by him, or even by his servants, but by God. And he couldn't remember that. He couldn't realize that. He couldn't acknowledge that he was dependent upon the generosity of God. And it was God who gave him the abundance. It was not something he had of his own. It was not something he really owned when it comes right down to it. But third and most important is that he failed to see that his abundance had a purpose. He failed to see that there was a purpose for this tremendous crop that he had been blessed to receive. God blesses us so we can be a blessing to others. That's why we have so many of the blessings that we have in our lives. Indeed, we enjoy those blessings for ourselves, and it's not bad to enjoy them. But when we have enough, and then we have more, that's a good time for us to think about, how am I going to be a blessing to other people? Not just to those in my family, not just to those who are my immediate neighbors, but to others who are in need, others who could benefit from my compassion, my love, my generosity. Generosity is a word that has kind of lost its meaning in our culture because we have so much emphasis on getting more stuff for ourselves. But Christians teach generosity. In the church, we teach people that the gifts come from God. And the gifts are there to bless you and to bless your neighbor. And we are to be as generous as possible and live generously with the gifts that God has provided for us. That's why God put us in families. That's why God put us in communities. That's why God gathers us together in congregations, so that we can realize that we are not in this world alone, and that the resources we have, the gifts that we have, the opportunities we have, the neighbors we have, are there for blessing, and not just for accumulation. The writer of Ecclesiastes reminds us, vanity of vanities, all is vanity, and indeed, that's really what it comes down to. When you die, whose possessions are they going to be anyway? The writer asks. It's a challenge for all of us who are modern middle-class Americans. The government can take away as much as possible, and in fact there are people now who are very actively seeking to do exactly that. But how much greater our world would be if, instead of requiring the government to take away the things that we could give, if we just were more creative and found ways to use those gifts that we have to be a blessing to others. The other day we were having a meeting as pastors, and we're talking about how things are going this year. How's it going? It's already the middle of the year. How is it going in your church, and so on and so forth. And one of the pastors said, well, he says, I can't believe it, but we have a tremendous surplus in our budget already, and it's only halfway through the year. And we don't know what to do with it. Build a bigger barn. I said, no, that's not the answer. But it is a great challenge. It's a challenge for all of us. We who have been gifted by the Holy Spirit, we who have been baptized into Christ, we who have been adopted into the family of God through holy baptism, as our two young people will be in just a few moments. We who have been so blessed by God have the privilege and the opportunity to be a blessing to others. And that should require some thought, some really heartful, compassionate, creative thinking, so that instead of just sharing the bare minimum of what we can share with others, we find a way to share our abundance and to make other people blessed as a result. I wonder how that man who came to Jesus responded to Jesus' answer to him. I wonder what happened after Jesus was done telling the story. Luke doesn't tell us. Luke doesn't give us any idea what kind of response he got. But that's okay. Because you see, by telling that story, Jesus made possible for you today to hear that story once more. And Jesus made it possible for you to answer the question, what am I going to do with all the blessings God has given to me? What a difference it would make if we knew how blessed we are. Amen.